I want to open this to a discussion as one of the hosts, and the host being the Center for New Institutional Social Sciences. I just want to wrap it up a little bit, this discussion from this approach of new institutional social sciences, the idea of new institutional social sciences is that everything is institutions. However, institutions include formal institutions, which are parliaments and judges and courts, and informal institutions where narrative would probably fit pretty well, but also the notion of belief. So there's kind of a gray area here, you know, are narratives basic beliefs, or are the informal institutions the stories, right, that are actually something slightly different than basic beliefs? But I don't want to get into this because I want to open the discussion, but what I do want to say and relate to what kind of follow up some of the ideas that Jim brought up is that we used to think that profound beliefs never change. Basic assumption in economics, in social sciences more generally, profound beliefs never change. And then there are formal and informal institutions that organize themselves around these basic beliefs, and we all walk out of our beliefs using the formal and informal institutions to get things done, if you will. Okay, so that was kind of the, it was actually our own Norman Schofield that started working way back then about what he called belief cascades, right? So beliefs can go through this process where they lose traction and new beliefs come in. And my own mentor, Bill Riker, was one of the biggest social scientists of his time. Before he died, he actually was obsessed with this notion of rhetoric, right? That was everything for him. He said it was all about rhetoric. So now we get a picture, okay? We have beliefs or these stories that may fade, and then it takes a huge, you know, rhetorical person or someone who can really make an argument to create these new narratives that may take over. And I just want to give very quickly some examples that I think, because I really signed on the call that I think we've all signed on to kind of continue this and make this helpful and successful. So to give some examples of how these things actually work. And you know, one obvious example, of course, is this basic narrative that was very stable, impossible to change until in the war between the Arabs and Israelis. Until 1973, was the Israelis can win, we talked about, the Israelis can win any war, and therefore they don't need to worry about what the Arabs want to do. And the Arabs want to kill all the Israelis anyway, so, you know, we win the war, they try to kill us, you know, everything is fine. But then 1973 came about, and even though Israel, technically speaking, won the so-called Yom Kippur War, it actually lost it. Not because the military campaign ended with Israel losing, but because my generation, who fought this war, saw it as a terrible tragedy where we all lost a lot of friends, and we didn't at all think we won anything. Even though technically speaking, if you ask, you know, a military expert, of course we won. You know, all of their militaries disappeared, and our military was powerful. But my generation, you know, I have here another friend from my generation, you know, and he will tell you the same thing. You know, he's a little younger than me, but he has the same kind of trauma of this kind of the war that kind of proved. But to go back to Jim's point, that was not enough. It took Sadat, who one day said, you know what, to hell with your narratives. I'm taking my personal airplane, and I'm flying right into Jerusalem, and I'm showing up in Parliament, not like, you know, Obama showed up in Cairo University. In your Parliament, in your face, and I want to see you guys, you know, tell me that we cannot make peace. And I was discussing this over at lunch, that in the end, this peace came about because three very devout leaders, Sadat, very devout Muslim, Begin, very devout Jew, and Carter, a very ardent Christian evangelist, sat in the same room and literally believed that God was in the room. It was an narrative. Any expert that you'd ask, what happened, would tell you that's what happened. There was a new narrative, God was in the room, and they decided to do the right thing for a change. To go back to the story and to open it up to the stories that Jim was telling, we actually, with a colleague, Gary Miller, who's a huge expert on the civil rights era, we have conducted several studies. And one of the famous stories that comes, and if you study this era, and you see Lyndon Johnson trying to do things right, there's this very famous story. They did two legislation in 1957, that didn't work. 1964, that did not work. It took the 1965 voting right to really make it work and get rid of these fountains, black fountain and white fountain. But there is this very famous story where Martin Luther King goes to LBJ and he says, the 1964 is not good enough. And LBJ says, it's recorded history. I don't know if it's true record, but it's a narrative. The narrative is, LBJ tells Martin Luther King, he says, go back to the streets. I need a little more of that before I can deliver. And that's what happened. Martin Luther King went back to the streets, a little more burning, a little more, demonstrations, and in 1965, it finally happened. Now you can tell a lot of other stories of what happened, but it spoke to the point that Jim was making, that it takes these rhetorical geniuses. LBJ did not think he was the rhetorical genius that could actually deliver. He knew that Martin Luther King was a rhetorical genius, and so he said, you do a little more of your magic, and then I can deliver. So that's just kind of to sum it all up and opening for discussion. Please.
I have a sort of a two-part question. One is that if you have the new generation graduating from college now that is post-independence from these, so not only that from these countries, but also that they don't have a first-hand memory of Soviet times, but also they're also the digital generation, well versed in social media, and so I'm really interested from this group to find out what that combination. How that combination might play into some of the speculations we're having about what narrative is going to be in the next 20 years. Narrative itself as well as what the subjects might be.
Who wants to try and answer?
I was just thinking about the idea of textbooks. Are textbooks even going to be a reality in the next 10 years?
I will just start answering with a very quick comment. One of the things that we discussed over lunch, which is true for the Middle Eastern, part of the Middle Eastern conflict and part of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, is these are dormant conflicts. They're not active. Part of the reason why they're dormant is because this new generation, does not necessarily care as much, is affected. Raouf talked about the strong sentiments of the displaced. That I think that's another level of complexity and difficulty, and we do know that both sides of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, this kind of, we don't care, is a big part of the problem, because these problems are not going away, and yet the new generation, who has a pretty good life, and what do we care? And so the conflicts are not resolved at all, but that's just one angle.
It might be just groundless nostalgia for my generation, but I think you can see elements of a return of a narrative that has to do with fighting very big power by young people. I mean, the whole thing in Tunisia was set off for this idea of being humiliated. It wasn't, I mean, humiliation is maybe the most powerful emotion, human emotion there is. I mean, people will do anything to overcome or respond to humiliation. But being humiliated, and I think in Russia, for example, the last election, it wasn't so much that, oh, you know, these are middle-class people demonstrating in Moscow, and they were demonstrating a lot because they felt humiliated because they just blatantly stole the election, you know. And so there's that kind of movement. But if you think about media then, you want to see the prototype movie for this, I think, is Avatar. You know, this movie, every place I go in the world, they think it's about them. In China, they think this is about us. You know, because that's what the big industrial giants are doing to us. In Brazil, of course, they think it's about us. But a lot of people do, and there's this, you know, we're not seeing Occupy being a worldwide movement yet, but I think there's a feeling that the bigger forces there's a way of responding to them as young people, a need to respond to them. And we don't understand quite what it is, but they feel things are out of control and potentially dangerous in terms of environment and things like that. So maybe that's something that will come along. It's hard to know because otherwise it's hard to say exactly what does mobilize. How do you mobilize a bunch of young people? You know, and I don't know that anybody's being very successful at it right now.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I would like to tell you about Georgia. Yes, there is a generation who has no memory of Soviet times, but they study something about this time at school. They hear something from their parents and grandparents, and they know about it from media, from I don't know, maybe from films. They do not like much these films, but they see them. So the contradictory narratives affect this young generation. On the one hand, there is a new narrative which is represented by the textbooks, new textbooks. The details of this war over Abkhazia and South Ossetia are taken off these textbooks. They were narrated in the previous ones in details. When it started, how it started, which were the main places of this, and so on and so on. Then these facts disappeared from this textbook, and there is only general information about this war. Perhaps it's not bad, but on the other hand, there are other kinds of narratives. So, for example, after the war of 2008, these facts of Russian occupation, not only exactly in 2008, but earlier as well, came to the front. So this Museum of Occupation, then the commemoration days which are celebrated, if it's right, every year by the secondary school institutions in February, because it's the month when when Georgia was Sovietized in 1921. So it's a different, other kind of narrative, and it affects this young generation as well. So this is the contradictory process. On the one hand, this textbook narrative is more calm and more balanced than previous ones, but there are another narratives as well. So, for example, the construction of the monument to Stalin in Gori, and then the formation of the Stalin Museum in Gori, which was accompanied by the texts to explain new generation, and not only new generation, to explain why it happened and what was there till this museum was maintained, and so on. So this is quite a complicated process.
I have a follow-up question for our visitors. Here's a thought experiment. So So right now, the three of you share two languages in common, English and Russian. You also have, broad strokes here, a common experience of both you yourself and your fathers and mothers living on with the Soviets. So let's suppose this conference was held 50 years from now. Right, so other things being equal, do you think as people get next generation, they're perhaps less likely to know Russian, they will not have a first-hand experience. So do you think 50 years from now, everything else equal, the absence of the connectivity of the Soviets do you think you would be more far apart? In other words, now since you do share a common link with language and with this growing up with the Soviet, do you think that in the absence of that you would be further apart or less able to see eye to eye, if that makes sense? So it's the irony of the Soviets empire bringing you together. I know that sounds odd, but it's a commonality that.
Well, you mean 50 or 15?
50.
Or 5. Or 50. It's too long.
In other words, well, in other words, if other things being equal, if it was 50 years from now, everything that you would be scholars who would not have that commonality.
I can answer in such a way that actually it's too long, but I mean it depends on many factors. Yes, it was we lived in one empire, Soviet Union, and yeah, you are right. We had some commonality and links, but the problem, I mean, there are some reasons. It depends on what's going on in this region in future 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, if it could be developing a regional connections, because we have, for example, for the moment we have very good relation with Georgia. Azerbaijan and Georgia are very close, and they're allies. They have common interests, economical interests and political interests. So it depends on whether, for example, Armenia would be able to join to this combination of those two countries, and we can create some regional cooperation. If we have regional cooperation, I mean, all these people who live in the Caucasus and the South Korea, they have some Caucasian features, commonality not only in music, in cuisine, you know, even in behavior, you know, customs. So it's something that exists before Russians created the empire. So I think that, it will be developed if there are not any catastrophic development in the region. I think so.
And this imperial context was not only uniting, but dividing as well. So.
I want to say, if today's situation will keep, I think after 15 years we don't understand each other with Azerbaijanians. We don't, I think so. Why? We have now a small number of contacts. Our youth generation don't know each other. If Karabakh conflict will be resolved, maybe situation will be another. But if we will have the today's type situation, I think we don't understand each other. Our youth generation now in Armenia and don't know Russia, knows English. Change situation, and in Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yes, Rauf is right. Georgian, Azerbaijani relations are very active. No problem in these ways, but with Armenia it will be, I think so. And I want to react on two questions. First, Professor Werch said about collaboration. We had some idea connected with Genocide Museum. In Yerevan, we have Genocide Museum, and I spread this idea near 2 years ago that it will be need to have a new part in this museum about positive examples Armenian-Turkish relations, when Turkish keep Armenians, helped Armenians in the period. So Taiwan is in Holocaust Museum. Yes, I am right? Right. So type non-standard ideas, I think, will be very useful. And about textbooks, when we lived in Soviet Union, textbook wrote in Moscow. our textbooks, Azerbaijani textbooks, Armenian, Georgia. And situation was another. But in this last 20 years after independence, situation is new. Why we did cross-examination, cross-investigation, these textbooks, today's textbooks. This textbook is not the same as in Soviet Union, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, and Georgia. And so type investigation did Chikovani, means we did cross-examination. No, after we will have results, we send you this information. And interesting to investigate today's situation. In Soviet Union, global, Kremlin said, so is right, no problem. But now, new situation. Azerbaijani historians work active in this area. I know well-known, high-level, interesting persons in Armenia, new tendencies, new, and this is a very important main today's textbook. Yes, the mentality, today's mentality in our youth generation is another. It's another change situation very quickly. Why? You are right. It will, we investigate today's textbooks. What was in Soviet Union? It will be need to forget to go. Thank you.